From Square 2, this is What's Wrong with Revenue. I'm Mike Lieberman, CEO at Square 2, and along with my longtime friend and business partner, Eric Kalis, this show answers the question many CEOs, CMOs, CROs, and business owners are asking, what's wrong with revenue? New shows drop every Thursday morning. You can find the video version of the show on YouTube at the Square 2 Marketing channel, on our website at the What's Wrong with Revenue page located in the footer, or on our free streaming service Square 2 Plus, both located at square2marketing.com. You can subscribe to the show or subscribe to Square 2 Plus, and we'll email you new show content as soon as it's published. You can also submit questions to the show on the What's Wrong with Revenue page of our website. Eric and I answer questions every single episode. You can also find the podcast version of the show on all your favorite podcast platforms. Enjoy the show. Hey everybody, welcome to What's Wrong with Revenue Season 2, Episode 19. I'm Mike Lieberman, CEO at Square 2. I'm here with Eric Kalis, CMO and Chief Entrepreneur in Residence. Eric, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's Friday.
Good. What's the weather like in Florida?
You don't want to know. 85 sunny, no clouds.
Well, it's a beautiful day here in Philadelphia. It's my perfect temperature. Shorts and long sleeves. It's in the mid-60s. I like it.
Excellent. Excellent.
Real quick before we get started, today we're going to be talking about the secrets to solving your biggest revenue challenges in an IDS session. If you're not familiar, IDS stands for Identify, Discuss, and Solve. It's a big part of the weekly revenue team meeting and a big part of the revenue generation system, or RGS, that we've been talking about all along in Season 2. Just to remind everybody, if you're interested in the show, go to the Square 2 Marketing channel on YouTube. You can pick up all Season 1 and Season 2 episodes there on YouTube, as well as our new stream, Pickleball Business Bangers, a fun little clip show where Eric and I play pickleball and talk about how it relates to generating revenue. I think you're going to like that. Episode 2 should be up there shortly. Go check it out. You can also get the show on Square 2's free streaming service, Square 2 Plus, located at square2marketing.com/Square2PLUS. It's just like Netflix with channels for CEOs, CROs, CMOs. There's a HubSpot channel. You can get all of our audio and video content there. It's posted fairly regularly, and you can subscribe, and we email you every time we post something new, just like Netflix. And if you're into audio content, I was actually checking out our podcast on Apple. It looks really good. The show is converted to its audio format and posted to all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, all your favorite platforms. Go check it out. If you're into audio content, download it and listen to it on the go. So today, we're going to talk about solving your biggest revenue-related challenges and some very specific methodologies on how to do it. Every company has challenges when it comes to revenue. Some companies need more leads. Other companies have enough leads, but can't turn those into sales opportunities. And believe it or not, some companies have a ton of sales opportunities, but just can't seem to get them to say yes at the end of the sales process. And then we have worked with clients that have retention issues. They're losing customers more than they can sign new customers. And today, the process of generating revenue is more complex than it's ever been before. And you really need a system and process for dealing with all of those revenue-related issues. Now, RGS, which is our revenue generation system, has its specific Identify, Discuss, and Solve methodology that is very familiar to some of you if you practice EOS. It's part of every single weekly revenue team meeting. It helps you work through challenges and solve these revenue-related challenges every single week. And if you think about it, if you have one of these meetings every week, you literally would be able to make at least 52 upgrades to your revenue generation effort if you practice this approach. Some of the things we're going to cover today is exactly what is IDS and why it's so effective. How does IDS become part of the regular weekly revenue team meeting? Who manages the Identify, Discuss, and Solve process? What are some tricks to make this process highly effective and even enjoyable for a lot of the people participating? And then before we wrap up, we'll handle some examples of revenue-related issues that got solved in IDS sections of some sample weekly revenue team meetings. So Eric, I know you're all over this. You run IDS sessions for some of our RGS clients. How do you want to kick off our session today?
Well, first of all, you got to give a big shout out to EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, which is the foundation that we built RGS on. So if you're running your company on EOS, a lot of this will sound familiar. which is a good thing because we promote RGS as the ultimate EOS plugin. So big shout out to EOS. They're doing some really great work helping people drive their business forward. I think that one of the biggest challenges of most businesses is that these issues don't have any kind of container that you could put them in, waiting to have a really good discussion. And then businesses don't have a forum by which to discuss these issues. And the IDS, as part of a weekly revenue team meeting agenda, solves both of those issues. So I'm excited to kind of dive into some of the nuances of what IDS is in today's episode, Mike.
That sounds good. Maybe you could look, even if you're on EOS, that's a journey on EOS, and some people may be early in that journey, some people may be further along. So maybe you could just share with our audience, exactly what identify, discuss, and solve means in its application, like we're talking about it today. Like what would that feel like if someone was going through IDSing a particular issue?
Yeah, so to start at the very beginning, when you have a weekly revenue team meeting, it's a 90-minute agenda. 60 minutes of those 90 minutes is carved out specifically for the revenue team to talk about challenges, obstacles, opportunities, all sorts of things that they need some groupthink applied to. So right away, 60 minutes of the 90 minutes is carved out for this absolutely mission critical component of the agenda. And what the 60 minutes of IDS is basically a list of all challenges that the team comes up with, either during the meeting or in advance of the meeting that they put an issue on the list. The issue list could be anywhere from 2 to 200 issues. Those are then prioritized, 5 being the most critical, and we need to talk about it today. 1 being it's important, maybe we could talk about it next week, but it's not urgent. Then the team, after they're done prioritizing those issues, starts to pick away at all of the 5s, the things that are the most pressing from an urgency and importance standpoint. And what happens is we're all following the same format. First, when we have an issue, we have to identify it. Now, that seems kind of obvious, but lots of times the issue, when it's identified, is not really the issue. It's a symptom. It's something adjacent to the issue. And with a little conversation, we tried to get really to the root of the problem, so we know we're talking about the right thing and not wasting our time. So let's say that takes a few minutes to hash out and really make sure that we all agree that this is the issue we want to work in. The next part is discussion. Discussion is the person who brought the issue is discussing exactly what they think should go on. The team is asking questions, they're brainstorming, and they're really discussing. And they're not trying to get to the solution yet, but they're trying to get all the information out on the table so that everybody sees the issue from all the different angles. So that's the discuss phase. Could take 2 minutes, could take 20 minutes. And by the way, if you have 50 issues on your list, the goal is not to attack all 50 issues on that weekly revenue team meeting, but take to 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, whatever issues, and work on the ones that are the most pressing in those 60 minutes. When the 60 minutes is up, we're done with the conversation. Yeah, we could take it offline for more conversation, but that week's IDS session is done. So as we have the, let's say, half a dozen most critical issues, we're going to identify and discuss them. Now that all the information is there and everybody has a clear picture of what the issue is, the third step is solving. The goal is to solve this issue once and for all so that it never pops up again on our issue list, which is pretty important because I'm sure that a lot of our listeners and viewers today are thinking to themselves, holy smokes, we talk about the same thing all the time in our meetings. And that's because you never get to the third step, which is actually of solving, coming up with a solution, coming up with an action plan to provide a solution and something like that. Now, some things are problems, but some things also might be opportunities, and other things just might be updates that people want to give on a specific area that we're working on. No matter what the category is, it always follows IDS. We're going to identify what the issue is. We're going to discuss everything around it to get down to exactly what the details are. And then we're going to create some action items to solve it or literally make a decision at that meeting. As soon as IDSing is done for that specific issue, you immediately move on to the next issue. Okay, let's identify issue number 2, and so forth and so on until the 60 minutes has elapsed.
Yeah, so I thought maybe we could model this a little bit for people because look, I mean, we've been doing it at Square too. We're still learning how to get better at it. It seems like something that, the more you practice, the better you get at it. I don't think anyone kind of hops into an IDS session and all of a sudden they're awesome at it. So, you know, um,
Well,
it's
Mike, let's use the actual example that you emailed me and the team this morning. We don't have the testimonials on our new website. Let's
Yeah,
do
I
that.
was actually gonna talk about that, but I wanted to even go back a little step further to the source of issues because I think that's interesting. One of the things that the weekly revenue team meeting is supposed to do is focus everyone's attention for 90 minutes around this kind of effort, as opposed to maybe, attacking it sporadically over the course of the week and maybe being a little less efficient and distracting people from other things that they might be doing. So, um, for instance, I was talking to our marketing manager this morning, and the issue of the videos on our website came up, and I was like, "Oh, throw it on the weekly revenue team meeting as an issue, so we can talk about it on Tuesday, where everyone is going to be in that meeting who needs to be aware of it, and everyone is going to be there who can help us solve it, as opposed to potentially me getting Kevin and Kate and a bunch of other people together to talk later this afternoon about something that we can clearly talk about on Tuesday when everybody's together." So I think, one of the things that a system does is makes people more efficient. And by in this meeting, when issues come up during the week, putting them in this meeting and tackling them in this meeting is a great way to be efficient. The other thing that we've learned around issues is that a lot of issues come up in the weekly revenue team meeting. So for instance, there's a section of the meeting where we're talking about data. And as you're going through your scorecard, issues tend to pop up. Hey, we're in the red or we're in the yellow. Okay, well, we don't know why. Great, let's make it an issue. There are headlines that are part of the regular weekly revenue team meeting where people are talking about things that are going on in the company. That might trigger an issue to be discussed during the IDS section. So there are a lot of places during the week and in the other elements of the weekly revenue team meeting where issues get identified and get put, as you said, into this container, which is the IDS section, so they can be captured, prioritized, and then tackled. So I think that's one kind of important motion for people to understand how this kind of collects all our issues in one nice place for us to tackle them. To your point, Square 2 recently launched a new website about a month ago, and the old website had a lot of client testimonial videos on it. And just through the redesign process and in an effort to streamline the website and make it more user-friendly, the old videos that were on the website got left off the new website. I don't think anyone did it. I don't think it was done intentionally. I think it was just kind of overlooked. There are plenty of places where those videos could happily land on our new website that would be perfectly reasonable. We just have to do that. So, we identified that as an issue. We, instead of quickly huddling and distracting people, I just said to our marketing manager, put it on the issue list for next Tuesday so we can talk about it, figure out how we want to handle it, assign some to-dos, and very efficiently tackle that specific issue, which will help us get more people on the website, help us give them a better experience, help us redirect people to those videos when they want to hear other clients talking about what it's like to work with Square 2. It's a lot of value in fixing that particular issue. So I think that's a good example of something that popped up, how we dealt with it, how we used the meeting to deal with it, and then how IDS would be used to get everybody who needs to be part of this solution talking about it, figuring it out, and then to-dos assigned with timelines too of when we expect all that work to be done. Nice, tight process for getting through stuff that needs to be done to keep the company moving forward. Make sense?
It does, but I'm going to push back, Mike, because is that really the issue? And I'll give you something to think about. Is the issue of how we missed making that part of the new website? And as a bigger issue, as a marketing agency, are we missing things for clients? And what can we do to look at our own quality control systems to make sure that nothing falls between the cracks? And that's a really good example of how the leaving out of the testimonials simply might be a symptom of a bigger issue, which is a couple of holes here and there in our work that we're doing for clients. In this case, it was okay. We did it for ourselves and there's no harm done. But if we were to do that in front of a client when we were doing a new website for them, that would be a bit embarrassing.
Yes, that issue's already been discussed, and it doesn't seem like this is a client issue. It seems more like, as usual, the agency gets slightly less attention that the clients get, right? So
Which
yeah,
it actually could be another adjacent issue, right? How does
it
the
could be,
agency get the stuff of the same quality as the clients
right,
do? Because clients are fanatical about the work that we do. We
right.
should be fanatical about the work we do for ourselves also.
We should be, yes. That's been an issue we've been working on for 20 years. So maybe we can finally tackle that with the IDS session coming up, sure.
Shoemakers
All
kids.
right, yeah. So that's some good conversation around IDS and how it works and how it's all effective. And I think we also kind of covered how it's part of that weekly revenue team meeting, which is really critical. So let me ask you a question. Who manages the IDS process? Because, like I said, kind of offhand, like it is something that we're learning and we're getting better at, and having been immersed in EOS, it seems like a lot of companies who move to EOS have similar challenges, like they have to get good at IDSing. So who manages this process in the weekly revenue team meeting?
Yeah, so when we have a new client who comes onto RGS, the first thing we do is we have a kickoff meeting. And the kickoff meeting is a one-off meeting because after that, you just have your weekly revenue team meetings. That's your meeting. But in order to get started, we have a kickoff meeting. And one of the agenda items right out of the gate is who is going to be the facilitator of the meeting and who is going to be the scribe. So the scribe, working backwards, is pretty easy. They're the person who's everybody's watching them as they're taking notes in 90.io, and they're capturing, making to-dos, making issues, making rocks, all those things that you have to do, and everybody's watching because we're all agreeing that that's what's going to happen. But the facilitator, that's not the rainmaker, as we talked about in an earlier episode. That could be anyone on the revenue team meeting who's running the meeting. And they're kind of like the police. And what I mean by that is they're not giving their ideas and everybody's approving it. They're just managing the agenda and the time and what are the sections of the agenda that we have to be focused on. So in an IDS section, the first thing that a facilitator has to be good at is moving it along. Because typically people are over discussing some of those things. And by that, I mean that they might be politicking for their point of view, their influence on the solution, when all we're really doing is trying to have an open and transparent discussion about what can we do to make this issue go away forever. If the facilitator finds that someone is politicking or the conversation is circular or tangential, they have to say, hey guys, let's continue to go on. If there's nothing left to discuss, let's move on to solving the problem. So they just have to be aware of what's going on in the meeting to keep it moving along. It would be a sin to spend 20 minutes on an issue that could be solved in 10, which would then forego another issue being discussed in the limited time we have in the weekly revenue team meeting. Also, while we have some good materials, EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, has some good materials about running a level 10 or L10 meeting each week, which a revenue team meeting is that. And some good videos that they posted as well to help facilitators understand how to keep that meeting moving forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the rainmaker. Can you just clarify a little bit the rainmaker role versus the facilitator role? Because that's not the same person, right?
It could be the same person, but typically it's not. The rainmaker is the one person in your organization that is both accountable and responsible for hitting the revenue team number. Now, those targets that have been placed by leadership on what we need to do to make it a successful year, the challenges that a lot of companies have is that there's no one directly accountable and responsible for that number. You might have a VP of marketing and you might have a VP of sales, and everybody's trying to get their part of the business running smoothly or effectively. But that one person that's in the organization that's directly accountable, responsible is the rainmaker. It's a different way of looking at it because typically, you have three parts of any business that runs. You have your sales and marketing function that's generating revenue. You have your delivery or operations or account services team that's delivering the product or service that you sell. And then you have your administrative group, typically headed by finance. That's also HR and IT and all the things that need to support the business. So those are the three areas. The rainmaker is typically the head of that first business function, which is sales and marketing. And the reason we call that out in a weekly revenue team meeting or the revenue generation system in general is because it's a shortfall of most companies. If you don't have someone who's accountable and responsible, then nobody's watching out for the number. And it's just a lot of happenstance. We hit the number one month, we don't hit it the next month. They're not orchestrating the system necessary in order to make sure we hit the number every single month, every single quarter, and every single year.
Yeah, I don't want to deviate too far from our topic, but I feel like this is a conversation that you don't hear too frequently. A lot of companies would probably say like, oh, I have a VP of sales. They're responsible for the revenue number, right? Or I have a chief revenue officer. They're responsible for the revenue number. So are those similar to the rainmaker role, or is there something different there?
They can be, but the additional part of the rainmaker is running the revenue generation system. So if you have a VP of sales that's only involved in the sales part of revenue generation, it's leaving generating revenue from customer service and generating revenue from marketing off to the side. And that's inefficient and obviously something we don't want. We have three separate functions in pretty much every company: sales, marketing, and customer service. The rainmaker has to be responsible for all three of those areas, not just sales and or marketing. Now, if you have a chief revenue officer, the person who's hiring a chief revenue officer is a lot closer to understanding the concept of rainmaker than someone who has a VP of sales and a VP of marketing. They're not connected or working together. And that's a good thing, right? But even the chief revenue officer sometimes leans too far into sales when they should be looking at all three buckets: customer service, marketing, and sales.
So if you had a CRO and marketing, sales, and service rolled up to them, you would have a rainmaker.
100%.
Okay, very good. Got it. Okay, so moving along, you've run a lot of these IDS sessions. So maybe you could share with us a couple of tips or tricks or techniques that make this process highly efficient, maybe even enjoyable for the people participating. Like I said, Square Two is, still kind of early in their experience with this, and I think we've gotten better at our IDS sessions, but you have more experience working with clients too on this. So what would you how would you enlighten our audience in terms of ways to make this part of the meeting a highly efficient and effective?
Well, the first thing is I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, right? And Simon Sinek has something called the 5 whys. You have to ask why 5 times at least to get to the root of an issue. Now, I'm not saying you have to say every single time has to be 5, but that concept of like, well, is that the issue? Let me ask it another way. Why is it this way? Well, why is that? And it all comes from, Daddy, why is the sky blue? Because it is. Well, why is it? Oh, because it's in the sky and it has air and the sun may, I don't know actually why the sky is blue, right? But the point is
it has
that
to do with light.
something to do with light, right? But the point is that little kids are always, but why, Daddy? But why, Daddy? And that's actually a pretty helpful tool. Even now, I modeled it with you. You're like, well, the testimonials didn't make it onto the new Square 2 marketing website. Well, why didn't they make it onto the website? Was it a lapse in our internal systems? Did someone just forget? Did we not discuss it? Well, why? Well, now we get down to it. Oh, we don't have a step in our process that reviews an old website that's being transitioned to a new website. And getting down to that as the issue, that we don't have a process in place, we can plug that hole a lot easier. And that's all I'm saying is the 5 whys help us drill down. Challenge your teammates who might think one way about what the issue is to really get to the root of the issue, and that's a lot more efficient. So right away, the number one technique is to push back and challenge until we all agree and there's consensus that this really is the issue. Also, you got to keep the clock going, because a lot of the issues are not something that requires an hour of conversation. Maybe it's 5 minutes of batting it around, identifying it for 2 minutes and 3 minutes of discussion, and then 4 minutes of brainstorming what the solutions might be, another minute to create a couple of to-dos that come from that, and that issue is solved for the most part. Now, there are some pretty hairy issues, right? And I'll give you an example of one. A lot of times EOS talks about personnel in the form of the right person in the right seat, meaning that you can have a great person who fits with you culturally, but they're not performing in their specific role, or vice versa. You have a person who's performing in your role, but they're not good culturally. And the conversation around people tends to expand an IDS section. Should we fire them? Should we give them more training? What about getting them a coach? Are we doing the right thing? Do we give them all the tools they need? Like, those are bigger conversations because there's emotion involved with making a change in personnel. So maybe that's 20 minutes of conversation, but still we got to keep it on track. And when we start to go over the same ground again, we got to move on. And that's really a second tip that I would give. But otherwise, if you understand IDS, and if you Google IDS or EOS, IDSing, or identify, discuss, and solve, there's a boatload of information about how to execute it and how to be good at it.
Yeah, I think the other, some of these techniques is used in the Vistage meetings too. I used to be a member of Vistage. They process a lot of issues for the people in the meetings, and the questioning piece of it is big to help the person who's expressing their issue really get to the core root of what the issue is. So, maybe giving, like, allocating some amount of time for the other people in the meeting to ask some qualifying questions, and then shutting down the question time and say, okay, now let's work on solving it, right? If we feel like the questions have uncovered the issue appropriately, that's enough questioning. Let's move on and see if we can come up with some solutions here.
Yep. And like I said, I would think 80% of issues are pretty black and white, and 20% of them, like the personnel one I gave, could be a little bit fuzzy. But for the most part, you could solve a typical issue in 10 minutes or less.
Right. Now, you mentioned
Also, Mike, as a quick side note, the reason that it's so efficient in an IDS setting is because everybody is aware that for the next 60 minutes, we're working on solving problems, which is opposite to what you just said. Like, well, should I just grab the team for 10 minutes and talk about why the testimonial? Now I have to stop my task. I have to log on. I'm thinking about my lunch, right? Like, it's just impromptu. Then there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a lot more efficient if you do it all in one session.
Yeah. Now, one of the questions that comes up frequently is about the number of issues and how many issues we should be getting through, and what about issues that we don't get to? Like, how do you help someone figure that out? Because there really is there's no like rule around this.
The rule is as many as possible, but in an effective way. We don't want to rush through the list just to say we knocked off all the issues on the list. And I can't remember a time where we got through all the issues on the list. Some of them that are ranked 4 or 3 or 2, they just stay on the list and they pop up next week or the week after. So, you have to refrain from really trying to get through them all. You want to get through the ones that you've given the proper attention, because as a group, we've prioritized those as both the most urgent and important.
Yeah. If you're prioritizing them correctly, then if you don't get to something, it should be okay for it to stick around until the next weekly revenue team meeting, right?
It's true. And like, what did Jess bring up in our leadership team meeting? Oh, she wanted to switch some software. And
the backup software,
right? It literally took 45 seconds to get through that issue, because we're like, sounds good, Jess, nice work. Right. Like, there was
but to our point, like, that wasn't the most important issue on our list. It was just one that we could get through quickly. Like, this comes up frequently too. When I talk to people about this whole process, they're like, well, I got a couple of quick ones. Should we get those out of the way first? And the answer is actually no, right? We're supposed to be working on the most important issues, not necessarily the ones that can be solved quickly.
That's correct. In Jess's case, it was important to inform us because she needed also approval by the leadership team to move forward on that project. So that 45-second was both urgent. We needed to get it going because our old provider was lame, and important because this is the whole backup to our entire computer system, right? So she put that on the list. We correctly identified that as a 5 priority. And when that one came up in 45 seconds, we were done and moving on to the next one. So, issues aren't always problems. Issues are always things that are going on that you want to discuss or need some group think around. We could have said to Jess, well, hold the phone there. I just read an article that this kind of backup is more appropriate. Have you investigated that? Which would have led to not solving the issue, putting a to-do on the list for Jess to research that over the coming week and come back to the weekly revenue team meeting to talk about that.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so I got one more topic here before we wrap up, and we're going to do some questions today. I know that you're a big fan of the questions, so we'll
love
cover
the
a couple questions at the end of the show. So maybe you could share with the audience some revenue-related issues as examples that have gotten solved in some IDS sessions that you've been a part of. in the weekly revenue team meetings you've been in?
Yeah, there was a great one this week. The client, a team member at one of the clients put during the week on the issue list, low close rate as a problem, right? As an issue. So the low close rate was generated because as April ended, that specific person couldn't hit their personal number. So it was a big issue for them. And they thought that close rate was actually the issue. So when that issue came up, we talked about identifying it. And the person correctly said that we have a low close rate. So we said, well, is the low close rate the issue? Or is it what leads up to the closing of a deal? And that was a good conversation. We agreed as a team that actually close rate was the issue. When we discussed it, the team, which is, remember, not just the sales team, it's the marketing team and the customer service team, and me as their RGS coach is always there to ask questions and experience share based on lots of companies like theirs. And what we talked about was the sales process and what is going on in the sales process that leads to that low close rate. At the end, when we identified it as close rate and discussed the why close rate of that sales process was perhaps the issue, the solving of that problem led to a understanding that not today, but a second quarter objective, or as we call them, ROC, was going to be a blowing up and a rebuilding of the sales process. Too big of a project to do in just 1 week without a to-do would suggest, but big enough that if they really wanted to solve the close rate problem, that they needed to take a hard look at their sales process, which not everybody was following and was a little loosey-goosey. Now, before we left that IDS session, we talked about 2 or 3 quick little tweaks we could do based on that conversation that we could execute right away to try to make some progress on this low close rate issue. One of them was that they sent me, in this case, their fractional rainmaker, the copy of the sales pitch, the deck that they were using from PowerPoint that they were pitching. And that quick review, which I reviewed for 30 minutes and gave some feedback, was a very simple way that they could start to make a little progress without waiting for the entire sales process to be blown up. So that was a very interesting conversation we had. I think from a quantifying perspective, it took about 18 to 20 minutes to talk through that specific issue. The team was very honest and open that they suffer from low close rate, and I mean like less than 20%. I gave them the encouragement that a 33 to 50% close rate was typical in B2B, and that's where we should shoot. And then we put in our long-term issues, because it's next quarter, not this quarter, the understanding of blowing up the sales process as a quarterly ROC.
Yeah, it's a really good example.
Yeah, I mean, it's impactful, it's urgent, it's important, right? And the whole team can get involved. So maybe in that conversation, the marketing folks say, hey, you know what? We could create a video that'll move people faster from stage 3 to stage 4. And the customer service people might be saying, well, as soon as you close a deal, why don't you let us jump in with an introduction and we could start to cross-sell them and upsell them right from the beginning, and we can systematize that. So all sorts of good ideas came out of that, but it was not the point to solve it and redo the sales process in that meeting. We then used the 90.io software to organize the little thoughts that we had and ideas that we had and objectives that we created for the future.
Got it. All right, good. Great. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay. Let's answer a couple questions that we've been collecting over the past couple of weeks, and then we'll wrap up our show for the session here today. So this is from Jonah in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Who should be involved in the regular weekly revenue team meeting?
Oh my goodness. It's a question that comes up literally every single time we talk to a prospective client. First of all, you have to have representatives from leadership, sales, marketing, and customer service. You must have those 4 groups represented if you want to have an effective weekly revenue team. The team, though, can sometimes be folded, right? Like maybe you only have one internal marketing assistant and the sales team really drives marketing, and you have an outside agency, right? So those like complications lead to who should be present in those meetings. But I'll tell you one thing, and this is based on my vast experience of running these meetings. Less people is better. It's hard to invite 11 people to your revenue team meeting, then realizing that you don't need all 11 people and it takes too long to get through everybody's opinion. And then you got to tell 4 of those people not to show up anymore. It's a lot easier to start with 4, 5, or 6 people, and then perhaps bring in another person if it's evident that they can. Also, a 4-person, 5-person meeting runs a lot more effectively than a 11-person meeting just by the numbers. So my advice is try to start with 4 representatives, leadership, marketing, sales, and customer service, and build from there. Always err on the side of fewer people than more people. You're on mute, Mike.
Who has the 2 pizza rule? Is that Jeff Bezos?
Still can't hear you. Sorry.
How about now?
There you go.
Who has the 2 pizza rule? Is that Jeff Bezos?
I think so.
And that what is what? I can't have a meeting that requires more than 2 pizzas to feed everybody, right?
Exactly.
Right. So that's like 5 to 6 people at the most.
Well, if I'm at that meeting, I'm eating a half a pie myself. So
No, you're not. That's old Eric.
old Eric.
Right. All right. Good to know. Okay. So that's who comes to the meeting. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it's tempting to have more people, but less is definitely better in terms of this. And, you know, what about people coming in and out of the meeting? Like what if you're going to have a topic and you need someone that doesn't regularly attend? How do you feel about that?
No problem at all. In fact, we just had that 2 weeks ago in one of the RGS clients. They had a very, very, very large opportunity that was stuck. And they asked the salesperson from that specific opportunity to sit in. We made it the first issue of the meeting, talked about that stuck prospect first, and then that person signed off.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
So it actually worked well. And because they sat in on the first 15 minutes of updates and on track, off track on the rocks, the data, and the to-dos, they got a little taste of what's going on in the revenue team meeting that someday they might aspire to be part of the revenue team.
Yeah, very good. All right. I got a question here from Savannah in Tampa. Can other meetings be collapsed into weekly revenue team meetings?
Yeah, that's actually something that happens quite frequently. So lots of times sales and marketing, as simple examples, are siloed, right? The marketing team is meeting Thursday at 3 o'clock and the sales team meets Monday morning at 9 o'clock. Lots of times those 2 meetings can be collapsed into the weekly revenue team meeting. I just had another good conversation with a client that the owner of a company wanted to have updates on the hot opportunities each week. So we said, well, the owner's in the revenue team, weekly revenue team meeting, and there's a section in the weekly revenue team meeting for sales opportunity review. Couldn't we just do that? And then now the sales team is preparing for the same update on the hot opportunities. And now the owner's sitting in, and if the owner's not there, she can access it from the recording that we make every single weekly revenue team meeting and archive so that everybody's on the same page, whether they're on vacation or not. So that was another example how we collapsed an update meeting into the weekly revenue team meeting. One of the other things is that there was typically one-on-one meetings between marketing and customer service and sales and customer service, which all got collapsed because they were all at the table in the same 90-minute meeting. And those meetings tend to drag on because they didn't have a firm agenda like the weekly revenue team meeting. So just to use that as an example, there's 3 meetings collapsed into one that's a specific 90 minutes a week. And honestly, weekly revenue team meetings are fun because they're organized, they are agreed to, it's the same people, same time, same date, and same agenda every single week. There's comfort in going to that meeting as opposed to, shoot, another meeting I have to attend. I got all this work I got to be doing. So the collapsing of the meetings is a big benefit of running a weekly revenue team meeting, in my experience.
Good. All right. I got a question from Dennis in Dallas. How do I know if I'm going to have enough issues to fill up 60 minutes?
Well, number one, it's very rare that the issues list is exhausted because, as you said, Mike, new issues are being added during the course of the meeting always. And there's usually a couple of issues that are left over from the week before. So it's very rare that you wouldn't have issues to talk about. Now, remember, we talked about issues that maybe rank a 2 or a 3 that are on there that are important but not urgent. Those are the meetings when the list gets a little small that you attack those things because they're important. They're just not urgent. Now, should you come to the end of the issues list and there's no more issues to talk about, end the weekly revenue team meeting early and everybody could have a few more minutes back in their day.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good for everyone to understand these meetings are scheduled for 90 minutes, but sometimes they do end early. We actually run a 60-minute L10 meeting for one area of our company too, and it executes beautifully. Same agenda, just a little less time because we have a little less issues and there's a little less people in that meeting. So, I don't think you have to feel like you need to fill up 90 minutes if you don't have enough issues to fill up 90 minutes. But I also think after you start doing this for a little bit, you'll start looking at the meeting more like the container that you mentioned in the beginning of this show. Let's put that in the weekly revenue. Let's not try to deal with that now. Put that as an issue. Put that as an issue, and then everyone will be there. We can deal with it. We can deal with it efficiently. We can get it solved. We can assign some tasks, to-dos for people, and get people working on. I think that's something that takes a little practice and a little bit of muscle memory to just, instead of trying to solve everything instantaneously, using the meeting as the container and once you start doing that, you'll probably have plenty of issues, Dennis. And again, if you don't, you can get back to work.
Also, if you don't have any issues, you better be blowing through that revenue target every single month.
A good point. I mean, if you are doing that, you're probably not having this meeting anyway. So
That's right.
okay. My last question here is from Lindsay in Los Angeles. What happens if an issue can't be solved during the weekly revenue team meeting? You talked about that a little bit, but for Lindsay's case, just go through that again for her.
Yeah, it's a common occurrence, right? Someone has an issue, they bring it up, we discuss it, and then there is no solution because we just don't have enough information, or we need to do one or two more things to get to that point where we can make a decision on how to solve that problem. So what typically happens is that you identify it, you discuss it, and then there is no solving. You create some action items for that week. Like, for example, Mary, go check out that new software. And Tim, you talk to finance to make sure it's in the budget. And then let's all reconvene next week to make sure that that issue can be solved. Because you never take it off the issues list unless it's solved. So that means that an issue could stay on the list, even though you discuss it 2 or 3 weeks until you come to it comes to a head because you have enough information to make a good decision. So we do that lots of times. For example, the thing we talked about earlier with Jess and the new software. If you had suggested, oh, I heard there's a better alternative, then maybe that issue would stay on the list about switching softwares. But Jess's to do that week was to go do the research, talk to some people, and then come back with fresh information. And that's pretty common. Like, that's not something that you should be afraid of. It's you're trying to solve the problem once and for all. If it takes 2 or 3 go-tos, great. It's better than having that same problem linger on for months, if not years.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All good. Great. Thanks for handling those questions. That covers the question section of the show today. Eric, thanks a lot. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to be talking about companies that are ready to hire their first senior marketing person. So it's a pretty big move to go from one junior person or a part-time person to a full-time senior marketing person. So we're going to talk about how a revenue generation system can help you feel good about that hire, make sure they're executing highly efficiently, and what that transition might look like. So wrapping up, again, reminding everybody, if you're interested in the show, you can go check it out on YouTube. Square Two Marketing's channel has all the episodes of What's Wrong with Revenue for season 1 and season 2. You can subscribe to it there. You can like us and you can provide comments. We pay close attention to all the comments provided. You can also check out the show on Square Two's free streaming service, Square Two Plus, located at square2marketing.com/Square2PLUS. We have channels for CROs, CMOs, CEOs. We have a HubSpot channel, and our new content pickleball business bangers will also be available on Square 2 Plus as well. And last but not least, if you're into audio content and podcasts, the show is available on your favorite podcast platform. Eric, thanks so much for the show today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
See ya.